morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to spring in the Bay Area, 42 degrees and pouring rain. But we have each other, and that's all that matters, isn't it? So I'm so glad you're here. Our title this morning, somehow on the program, which I actually make, one of the words got left out. Our real title is Instinct, Intuition, and Impulse. So I just left out one word because there's 3 I's: instinct, intuition, and impulse. And we're going to start with instinct because that's an easy one. We all know what instincts are because we all have them, right? Basically, they are our innate tendencies, our inherent behaviors. And this applies not just to us, but all living organisms. A natural aptitude determines how members of a species respond to stimuli in their environment. Plants know when to grow and when to go dormant. Orangutans know where the fruit is and when. Let's see. Gazelles know to flee from lions, right? And women know. Women know when there's a shoe sale at Macy's. Instinct. This is instinct. But only practically speaking. Because metaphysically, instinct means something a little bit different. It's an intrinsic intelligence that is not species-specific or even necessarily behavioral, okay? Because behind every organic structure lies its spiritual structure. The truth behind everything, it's the unseen reality that's common to everyone and everything in creation. It's God. Wherever life exists, that life is engendered by the divine and endowed with its inner knowing. And one of the names we give to that inner knowing is instinct. So, in these few short seconds, we've already taken the idea of instinct from the concrete out into the abstract. But we can't just leave it out there because, as we know, the source of all being is ever moving into expression. Emma Curtis Hopkins, how many fans do we have out there? She claims that in the universe there is a law of fulfillment of instincts. Now, wherever instinct arises, she says, a law responds to it that manifests it as substance. Now, if she's right, and let's face it, Emma could never be wrong, could she? If she's right, then we have a lot to look forward to in our lives. We have a power available to us that is beyond measure. We call it the law of mind in this teaching, or the law of attraction, but it's the same thing because ultimately there's only one law. Now, we will come back to Emma's specific reference to the law of fulfillment of instincts a little bit later, but first we're going to look at instinct across some other religions, work our way back up to New Thought. Let's start with Hinduism, because it's very ancient and my favorite to look at, often very parallel with science of mind, with New Thought, with metaphysics. Not so much in the case of instinct. They see instinct functioning in life forms, including human, at low or the very early stages of evolution. So animals would qualify in this category, as would persons who lack intellectual capacity. We all know some people like that. Nobody here, but outside in the world. Or people who still fear God rather than love God. Because learning to understand and love God entails a process of evolution, of moving out of fear. Of course, in Hinduism, they believe in karma. So through karma, one can transcend those low levels of existence in which instinct rules and move closer and closer to enlightenment. Let's move forward another 1,000 years or so to the Judeo-Christian tradition, which sees instinct as occupying 2 very important realms of human existence, moral and religious. Moral instinct is pretty easy to define. It's our inborn ability to differentiate between right and wrong. and it's a faculty we all possess, and we might even call it conscience in some instances. On the other hand, we have religious instinct, which is, in their view, our native inclination to worship something. Catholics in particular assert, for example, that no one is born an atheist, that children and so-called primitive peoples hold an essential belief in something divine. Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, echoes this idea, saying that humankind, quote, instinctively trusts in a higher power. Our own founder, Ernest Holmes, takes it further. He's a little more spiritual and unified, I think, in his approach. He defines instinct as the intelligence in an animal which directs its actions and tells it where to go to find food and shelter. It is really omniscience in the animal. Now, I need to point out that here he spells omniscience with a capital O, which of course makes it a synonym for God. So he's saying that instinct is God in the animal. He goes on. The same quality, more highly developed, makes a conscious appearance in humankind and is what we call intuition. Intuition is God in us, revealing to us the realities of being. And just as instinct guides the animal, so would intuition guide us if we would allow it to do so. Yeah. There's always that catch, right? There's a divine power out there that can do everything, and we need to participate with it. We have to do our part. How many of you are familiar with the book New Thought Terms and Their Meanings by Dr. Ernest Holmes? How many of you use it? It's absolutely fantastic. So in this book, Holmes has all kinds of wonderful definitions. He doesn't define instinct per se, but he has a term he calls the instinctive, omniscient I am. All of that capitalized, again, making it a synonym for God, right? The instinctive, omniscient I am, which, he writes, is the God within us, which instinct and intuition feels, knows, and accepts. Now, because he says feels, knows, and accepts, I am assuming as an editor that he means instinct, intuition, and intuition are one thing. In fact, anywhere you see Holmes use the word instinct, it tends to follow with a mention of intuition. Wherever you see instinct in the textbook, you will find a reference pretty close by to intuition, which is part 2 of our lecture this morning. How many of you would say that, in general, you allow yourselves to be intuitively led? Only women? Okay, Tim in the back, very good, okay. How many of you require a more rational approach? Okay. Some of you didn't raise your hand, so is there another category we need to talk about here? Okay. Now, I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, of course. But as students of truth, we cannot disregard the importance of intuition as we align our thinking and, by extension, our living with principle. We can't leave it out. It's very important, intuition. Let's look at Fillmore again. He defines intuition as the natural knowing capacity, the immediate apprehension of truth without resort to intellectual means. You got that? The wisdom of the heart, he calls it. And then he says, it is very much surer in guidance than the head. So even Fillmore, a very intelligent man who founded a very successful religion, is privileging the heart over the head. Now, similarly, a contemporary of his, the great French philosopher Henri-Louis Bergson, said this with regard to understanding reality. He said, "We should rely more on intuition than on rationalism or science." So convincing was his argument that none other than William James was persuaded to abandon logic as, quote, an adequate measure of what can or cannot be. William James, okay, what can or cannot be. As metaphysicians, we are never concerned with what cannot be. We are only concerned with what can be, because we know whatever we imagine is possible. It can be. So that's where we put our energy. Now, knowing this, we must also know that it would behoove us to contemplate the role of intuition in our application of principle. How do we do that? How do we actually access intuition? Now, sometimes if we don't access it directly or consciously or purposefully, it accesses us, doesn't it? As in dreams. There's a wonderful story about Elias Howe, who invented the sewing machine. And one of his challenges was deciding where to place the eye of the needle. And just when his funds were dwindling and he was running out of ideas, he had a very interesting dream.